Dr. Warren Steed said it the way small men say things they know they shouldn't. Loud enough for the room to hear, quiet enough to claim he didn't mean it. Fine. He set his coffee mug on the conference table and looked at the nurses gathered for evening handoff. His eyes found Serena Wolfe the way a spotlight finds the wrong person. Since Nurse Wolfe has so many opinions about how this department should be run, let's give her the floor tonight. Literally. He smiled. I'm pulling overnight staffing to 3. Wolfe stays. The rest of you are released. No one laughed. Nobody said anything. Not the residents lined along the wall. Not the charge nurse coordinator, who'd worked at Ridgemont Medical Center for 11 years. Not Dr. Jenna Park, the second-year EM resident who stared at her own clipboard like it had suddenly become very interesting. Serena stood near the door in blue scrubs, hands at her sides, 36 years old, brown hair in a low ponytail. Gray eyes that had a habit of going somewhere far away without warning. Her badge said RN, charge nurse, nothing else. She had asked, at the last 3 department meetings, about the November storm protocol. She had submitted a written request to double overnight staffing during the 6-week period, when Appalachian weather systems pushed road accident volume up by 40%. She had included a spreadsheet. Steed had called the spreadsheet alarmist. That leaves us with 1 resident and a single tech for a 12-bed R, Serena said. Then I suggest you manage your time efficiently. He picked up his mug. The board wants numbers. You want to talk about process. Tonight, let's see what your process actually produces. He walked out. Before we go any further, welcome to Quiet Badge's Stories. If you believe the people doing the hardest work in the hardest rooms deserve more than silence, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Tonight's story comes from Knoxville, Tennessee on the 3rd of November, during one of the worst storms to hit Knox County in 12 years. It started with a man's joke. It ended with 6 federal agents, 1 grandmother's iPhone, and a call sign that the entire hospital will not forget. Stay with me. The storm hit Ridgemont Medical Center at 7:51 in the evening. Not a metaphor. 60-mile-an-hour gusts off the ridge, horizontal rain that turned the ambulance bay windows into something you couldn't see through, the kind of weather that made highway driving feel like a dare. Serena had sent her remaining 2 nurses home with the others. Steed's orders passed through the coordinator's apologetic voicemail. What remained was Dr. Jenna Park, pale and sharp-eyed behind glasses she kept pushing up her nose. Dante, the R-Tech, 20 years in trauma, built like a man who had carried people. And Serena. She was restocking Bay 2 when the radio crackled. Ridgemont R, be advised. I-40 West, bridge at Alcoa Highway, multi-vehicle, school van, a semi, 3 passenger cars, fire and rescue on scene, multiple critical ETA, first wave 6 minutes. Jenna appeared in the doorway. Her face said the number she'd heard. How many? Serena asked. Dispatch said 8. 8 patients, 3 people, 12 beds, half of which hadn't been turned since afternoon because Steed had also cut housekeeping by 2. Serena finished stocking Bay 2. Bays 1 through 5, clear and prep, she said. Dant, trauma carts to Bays 1 and 3. Dr. Park, stay loose and ready to move. Nobody gets assigned until they're through that door and I've seen them. Jenna blinked. Steed said to call him if volume exceeded. Call him, Serena said, and while the phone rings, help Dante with the carts. Jenna called. The phone went to voicemail. Later, when people asked, Steed would say he had been driving in from home. The parking lot cameras would show his car had not moved since 5. The first ambulance arrived at 7:57. A man named Howard Garvin, 58, driver of a sedan that had spun under the semi's trailer. He came in without a blood pressure reading that made sense and a gash from his left shoulder to his collarbone that had soaked through 2 field dressings. The paramedic on his rig kept saying, "He's been holding, but I don't know how long," the way paramedics say things when they mean please hurry. Serena gloved up before the stretcher stopped moving. Bay 1, airway first, then the bleed. She checked his pupils, tilted his jaw, listened to the right side of his chest. Something was wrong with the sound. Not absent, wrong. Dante, needle decompression tray. Dante moved without asking why. Jenna said, "We should wait for imaging." He doesn't have time for imaging. Serena was already positioned. If I'm wrong, I'll write the incident report myself. If I'm right, he's breathing in 45 seconds. She wasn't wrong. The chest opened up. Howard's oxygen came back like a door had been unlocked inside him. His color changed. His hand, which had been slack against the rail, twitched. Jenna stared. Bay 2 incoming, Dante called from the doorway. Bay 2 was a 17-year-old named Sienna Crawford, a girl who had been in the school van coming back from a debate tournament, who had a fractured wrist and a deep laceration along her left thigh that had stopped bleeding only because the paramedics had been leaning on it with their full weight for 11 minutes. Her phone was in a Ziploc bag in the intake tray. The screen showed 12 missed calls from a contact named Mom. Hold pressure, Serena told Jenna. Right where your hands are, don't shift. The phone buzzed again. Mom. Serena looked at Dante. Answer it, speaker. Tell her Sienna's with us and she's breathing. She didn't stop working on the leg as she said it. Don't say stable, say breathing. Dante answered. A woman's voice came through, breaking apart. Sienna. Oh God, Sienna. Ma'am, this is Dante at Ridgemont. Your daughter is with our team right now. She is breathing. She's being taken care of. He paused, looked at Serena. She nodded once. He said, You need to get here. Drive carefully in this storm. We need you in one piece. The mother made a sound that wasn't a word. Serena leaned close to Sienna's face. The girl's eyes were glassy but tracking. Hey, your mom's on the phone. She's coming. Sienna's lip moved. Serena said softer, You keep your eyes open for me and she'll be here before you know it. Sienna blinked, slow present. The pressure was improving. Dr. Steed arrived at 8:14. He walked into the ER in a blazer and no tie, which meant he had come from home, which meant he had been home when 8 critical patients were being triaged by 3 people. He surveyed the bays. 2 patients stabilizing, Dante moving between 3 active stretchers. Jenna suturing Sienna's leg with more confidence than she'd had 20 minutes ago. Serena somewhere in Bay 4. Who authorized the needle decompression in Bay 1? No one answered immediately. Serena came out of Bay 4 with blood on her left sleeve. I did. Steed looked at the sleeve, then at her badge. You're a registered nurse. I know what I am. Then you know that procedure requires a physician. The physician was setting an IV in Bay 2 and the patient had 60 seconds. She kept her voice level, not quiet, level. He's breathing now. We can discuss protocol when the waiting room isn't full. Steed stepped closer, lowering his voice. You are on very thin ice, Nurse Wolfe. So is Bay 4. I need to get back. She walked past him. Bay 4 held a 6-year-old boy named Eli Prescott. He had been in the school van with his mother, Callie, and had come through the crash with a concussion, 2 broken fingers on his right hand, and a disposition to ask the same question every few minutes. Where's my dad? The paramedics hadn't had an answer. His father, Daniel Prescott, 41, had been in his truck on the same bridge. Separate vehicle, different impact. Last known status, still being extracted from the wreckage. Eli was small and very pale under the warming blanket. Dark hair. The kind of brown eyes that made you feel responsible for whatever they were looking at. His mother, Callie, was in Bay 6 with a broken collarbone being watched for concussion. Serena sat on the edge of his stretcher. Hey Eli, I'm Serena. I'm going to take care of you tonight. Where's my dad? People are working very hard to bring him here. She checked his pupils, his reflexes, the way he tracked her finger. Your mom is in the next room. She can't come right now because she has a boo-boo of her own. But she can hear you if you call out. Eli considered this. Is my dad going to be okay? I don't know yet. She did not lie to children. But I'm going to make sure that when he gets here, we're ready for him. He accepted that with a small nod. I have a tablet in my backpack, Eli said. My grandma was video calling me when the crash happened. I think it's still on. Serena made a note of it. She didn't know yet what that tablet was recording. She didn't know that Eli's grandmother, Louise, 70 years old, of Morristown, had been watching through a frozen video screen and had done the only thing she could think of. Posted the still live feed to her neighborhood Facebook group asking if anyone knew what had happened to her grandson. By the time Serena walked out of Bay 4, the feed had 400 viewers. By 8:30, 5 of the 8 patients had been moved through initial stabilization. Serena had not sat down, she had not had water. She had redirected Steed 4 times, each time shorter, each time more final. At 8:41, the power hiccuped. Not a full outage, a brownout, the kind that happened when the grid was overloaded, and a transformer somewhere in the county was making a decision it wouldn't survive. The lights in Bay 3 went to emergency strips. Bay 5's ventilator stuttered for half a second. Steed up at the central desk, transfer the critical cases. Serena came around the corner. Transfer where? In this storm? St. Anthony's has capacity. St. Anthony's is 40 minutes in good weather. There's a flood warning outside. Steed's jaw tightened. I'm the chief of this department and I'm making a clinical decision. You're making a liability decision. Her voice didn't rise. In Bay 1, Howard Garvin's hemothorax has been decompressed and is not yet stable enough for transport. In Bay 3, Frances Odom is a 74-year-old retired schoolteacher with crush injury to her lower extremities who will go into renal failure if she gets cold in an ambulance. In Bay 5, Nurse Wolfe. In Bay 5, we have Eli Prescott, 6 years old, possible intracranial component, whose father is about to come through that door. She pointed at the ambulance bay. I am not putting any of them in an ambulance tonight. Steed stared at her for a moment too long. Then the doors opened. Daniel Prescott arrived at 8:47 on a fire department stretcher, 3 firefighters holding lines, one of them doing compressions. Jenna said quietly, "Oh no." Serena was already moving. She did not look toward Bay 4. She did not look at Bay 6, where she could hear Callie Prescott asking someone what was happening. She looked at Daniel, gray under the oxygen mask, chest rising wrong, pelvis wrapped in a splint that told her everything about what the steering column had done to him. Lost pulse twice during extrication, the firefighter said. Got him back. 32 minutes of field time. Serena put her hand on Daniel's wrist. The pulse was there, frail and fast, but there. Bay 7, she said. Steed said, "There is no Bay 7. There is now." Dante rolled the spare cart to the hallway alcove. "Jenna with me." She looked at the firefighter who had been doing compressions. "You stay." The man nodded without question. They built Bay 7 in 4 minutes. Rolling monitor, crash cart, 2 IV poles, a surgical light on a wheeled stand. Jenna set 2 large bore lines in Daniel's arms faster than Serena had seen her move all night. Dante appeared at her shoulder. "Eli can hear what's happening." Serena glanced toward Bay 4. Through the glass, Eli was sitting up, his small face pointed at the noise. "Tell him his dad is here," she said. "Tell him people are helping, nothing else." Dante went. A moment later, Eli's voice carried through the hallway, small, thin, frightened. "Dad." Serena kept her hands on Daniel. "Your son is in the next room," she said, quiet enough that only Daniel could hear it. "He's scared and he's asking for you, so you stay." The monitor blipped, fell, blipped again, steadier. Jenna looked up. "Keep moving," Serena said. "We buy him time until surgery opens." At 9:03, Steed tried to pull her badge. He did it in the hallway in front of Dante, Jenna, 2 paramedics, and Francis Odom, 74 years old, retired schoolteacher from Maryville, who had been watching everything from Bay 3 with the focused attention of a woman who spent 40 years watching people reveal themselves under pressure. "Effective immediately," Steed said, extending his hand. "You are suspended pending review of unauthorized procedures. Badge and access card." The hallway went still. Serena looked at his hand, then at the badge on her own scrubs. On what grounds? Scope violations, insubordination, misrepresentation of clinical authority. He had clearly rehearsed the list. You've performed procedures outside your licensure and assumed command of a department you have no authority to lead. Jenna said, "She's the only reason these patients are still." "Dr. Park," Steed cut her off, "unless you'd like a written reprimand, stay quiet." Francis Odom's voice came out of Bay 3, clear and dry. "Young man, in 40 years of teaching, I learned to tell the difference between a person who has authority and a person who only has a title. You might want to sit down." Steed turned toward her. "I'm a patient," Francis said. "Not an employee, you can't write me up." Someone at the end of the hall made a sound that was almost a laugh. Steed turned back to Serena, beige now. Serena reached for her badge, her hand was steady. Then the sound of slow wheels on linoleum. Eli Prescott appeared at the edge of the hallway. Hospital gown, socks, one hand gripping an IV pole he had somehow detached from its anchor, the other hand held a tablet. He looked at Steed. "You can't take her badge." Steed blinked. "Son, you need to go back to." "She's taking care of my dad." Eli's voice shook but didn't break. "You sent all the other nurses home and she took care of everybody." He held up the tablet. "My grandma saw the whole thing. So did a lot of other people." The tablet had been in Eli's backpack, live streaming to his grandmother since 7:48. Louise Prescott had been on a video call with her grandson when the crash happened. She had watched the call go sideways, heard screeching, felt the bottom fall out, and sat frozen for 3 minutes before doing the only thing she could think of. She posted the still live feed to her neighborhood Facebook group, asking if anyone knew what had happened to her grandson. By 8:30, the feed had 1,200 viewers. By 9:03, when Steed extended his hand for Serena's badge, 4,000 people were watching an uncut livestream of the Ridgemont ER. They had watched Serena decompress a man's chest. They had watched her coach a second-year resident through a hemorrhage repair, while relaying information to a terrified mother on speaker. They had watched her build a trauma bay out of a hallway and a rolling cart. They had watched Steed arrive in his blazer 45 minutes late and spend the next hour trying to take control of something he hadn't been there to build. And they were watching him reach for the badge. Steed did not know about the 4,000 viewers, not yet. He looked at the tablet. He looked at the child. He reached for it. Serena caught his wrist. Not hard, not dramatic. The way you stop something that matters without making a performance of it. One step, wrist controlled, redirected. Steed's arm turned back toward him. He hit the wall of the alcove with his shoulder, Not enough to hurt him, exactly enough to stop him. That is a child's property, Serena said, and it's evidence. Steed stared at her. You just assaulted. I interrupted. She stepped back. Call it whatever you want, the camera already has what it has. 2 men in army dress uniforms arrived through the ambulance bay at 9:17, both getting soaked through. Behind them came a woman in a federal jacket carrying a phone showing a paused video feed. The taller officer looked across the ear. His eyes found Serena the way eyes find things they've been searching for. Steed stepped forward. This is a restricted. The officer said, Sergeant First Class Serena Wolfe. He said it quietly. The words still changed every room they passed through. Jenna looked at Serena. Dante stopped moving. Francis Odom looked up from Bay 3. Steed said, she is a registered nurse. She is, the officer said. She is also a former Army Special Operations Combat Medic and Federal Emergency Management Agency Urban Search and Rescue Team Leader. He paused. Call sign Compass. Nobody breathed. Serena said, Major Archer. The major nodded. Compass. Steed laughed, short and brittle, the laugh of a man trying to find footing on ice. That is not possible. The woman in the federal jacket held up her badge. Special Agent Yvonne Slate, HHS Office of Inspector General. Whether or not it feels possible, Dr. Steed, it's verified. She looked around the ear, the 8 patients, the 3 staff members who had held it together, the supply hallway still serving as a trauma bay. We've been in Knoxville for 4 days. We've been looking at Ridgemont for 6 months. Steed's blazer seemed suddenly too large for him. Looking at what? 7 patients in the last 14 months who arrived at this facility with survivable injuries and did not survive. Slate opened her folder. Delayed triage, missing supplies, cancelled consults, all on overnight and evening shifts with reduced staffing. The word staffing landed in the room like a stone. Jenna sat down on a stool without meaning to. Dante pressed both palms flat on the desk. Serena said, what were their names? Slate hesitated. Steed said, do not. Their names, Serena said. Slate read them. 7 names. 4 had come through on nights when staffing sheets later showed coverage below the required minimum. 2 were elderly. 1 was a child 9 years old who had arrived with a respiratory event and waited 38 minutes for a nebulizer treatment that had been misplaced after a supply room reorganization Steed had ordered that same week. Nobody moved while the names were read. Francis Odom said from Bay 3, put me down as a witness to tonight. Dante said, me too. Jenna pulled off her glasses, wiped them, put them back on. Me too. Steed tried twice to leave the building. Both times, Agent Slate's colleagues redirected him toward the administrative hallway, where 2 hospital board members had materialized with the pale, careful expressions of people who understand something is ending and are calculating how little they can be associated with it. Serena didn't watch him go. She was already back at the board. Major Archer stood beside her. He was quiet for a moment, reading the 8 patient names she'd written in her careful handwriting. You always did prefer night shifts, he said. Less noise. Until tonight. She marked a note on Howard Garvin's chart. How did you find me? You filed 5 safety incident reports in 6 months, same language, same format. He paused, same conscience. She kept writing. I came here to stay quiet. I know, he looked at her profile, it didn't take. At 10:12, the surgical team came down from the OR. The lead surgeon, Dr. Patricia Unger, took the patient report from Serena in 40 seconds flat, because Serena gave it in 40 seconds flat. Every patient, every intervention, every current status and risk. Unger listened with the attention of someone who has learned to separate signal from noise. When Serena finished, Unger said, who coordinated all of this? Steed opened his mouth from somewhere near the administrative hallway. Jenna said clearly, Serena did. Unger looked at Serena. Daniel Prescott goes to OR now, I'll want a full debrief after. You'll have it. They moved Daniel through the hallway. Eli had been taken back to Bay 4 by Dante, who sat with him, murmuring updates, keeping the child facing forward. As the stretcher rolled past, Serena stepped into Eli's sight line. Your dad is going upstairs to surgery, she said. That means he made it here. Eli's face crumpled, then steadied. Is he going to be okay? He fought very hard to get here. She crouched to his eye level. I told him you were waiting, I think he heard me. The boy considered this with the gravity children carry when they are holding more than they should. Then he held out the tablet. Can you give this to the lady in the jacket? Serena took it. I will. Grandma's probably scared. I'll make sure someone calls her. Eli leaned back against his pillow. She doesn't really understand Facebook, he said, very seriously. She probably pressed something she didn't mean to. By midnight, federal agents were sealing the administrative wing. By 1 a.m., the hospital's compliance officer, a woman named Audra, who had been handed paperwork she wasn't allowed to question for 11 months, opened a drawer she had kept locked at home and produced copies. Duplicates of incident reports that had been reworded, mortality reviews that had been resummarized, staffing logs where numbers had been quietly adjusted after the fact. Steed was escorted out of the building at 1:47 a.m. He passed through the ER on the way, every bay occupied, every monitor running. 3 nurses from the next shift had come in early. Nobody had asked them to, they had simply heard and come. Nobody looked at Steed as he walked through. Nobody except Frances Odom, who watched him from Bay 3 with the expression of a woman who has outlived several things she was told were permanent. "Good night, Dr. Steed," she said. He didn't answer. "Thought so," she said, and went back to her crossword. At 3:22 a.m., Dr. Unger called down from surgery. Dante took the call on speaker at the central desk. Daniel Prescott was alive. Massive pelvic fracture, internal bleeding, 2 surgical repairs, but alive. Critical but stable, which in the language of that night meant victory. In Bay 4, Eli had been asleep for 2 hours. Dante leaned into the doorway and looked at the sleeping child for a moment. "His dad made it," he said quietly, to no one in particular. Frances Odom, apparently not asleep, said from Bay 3, "Of course he did, she said so." Serena gave her statement at 4 a.m., seated across from Agent Slate at the central desk. She said her full name. She said her rank and service history, Army Special Operations Combat Medic, attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment, then deployed as FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Team Leader through Tennessee Task Force 1. 11 years of service, 3 hurricanes, 2 earthquakes, 1 apartment building collapse in Memphis that she did not volunteer additional details about. Slate asked why she hadn't disclosed her background when she joined Ridgemont. Serena was quiet for a moment. "Because I was tired," she said, "and I wanted to be somewhere quiet for a while." "Do you regret what you did tonight?" Serena looked at the board, 8 names. All of them still in the building, all of them still breathing. "No," she said. The news landed at 6 a.m. The local station that had been watching Louise Prescott's live stream was first, and by 7 it had been picked up nationally. Tennessee nurse with military background saves 8. During storm, director arrested in patient death probe. Serena hated every headline. Not because they were wrong. Because they made it sound finished, and she knew it wasn't. Howard Garvin had a long recovery ahead of him. Daniel Prescott had weeks of surgery still to come. Sienna Crawford would be in physical therapy for months. And somewhere in the file Agent Slate was carrying, 7 names that had never made it out of this building were waiting for the kind of attention that headlines moved on from. She stayed through morning handoff, checked every chart, walked every bay. When she finally went to the parking lot, the storm was over. The sky above Knoxville was doing the pale gray thing it does in early November, when it has exhausted every weather event it had planned. She sat in her car. She thought about a parking structure in Memphis, a woman's voice under 4 feet of rubble, calling out every 2 minutes like a metronome. The way Serena's hands had felt when the concrete shifted, and the voice stopped. The 2 months she had sat in her apartment afterward before someone from her unit called and said it was time. She had come to nursing because children felt like a reason to stay careful, stay present, stay in the room. Tonight she had stayed in the room. She clipped her badge back on and walked inside. 3 months later, the federal report named 4 systemic failures at Ridgemont: staffing misrepresentation, supply chain manipulation, falsified mortality reviews, and administrative retaliation against staff who raised safety concerns. It also named, without elaboration, the staff member who had filed the most consistent and accurate safety reports over the previous year. Steed pled no contest. The hospital board voted in a new emergency safety protocol. 4 rules went above the charge desk, printed large enough to read from across the room. No patient waits unseen. No staff member is punished for raising safety concerns. No administrator overrides in clinical triage. No one is ever just a nurse. Serena objected to the last line. Frances Odom had suggested it by phone from her physical therapy facility in Maryville. Nobody dared take it down. Eli Prescott came back in February wearing a superhero shirt and walking slightly ahead of both his parents, the way children do when demonstrating they have fully recovered. Daniel walked with a cane. Callie held his arm. They both had the look of people who had recently been reminded that ordinary evenings were not something to be wasted. Eli found Serena at the central desk. "I brought you something," he said. It was a drawing, crayon approximately to scale, the ear in orange and yellow, stick figures in blue scrubs running between stretchers. The figure at the center was taller than the others and had gray eyes rendered with particular care. Underneath, in the deliberate capital letters of a child who has recently learned to write, "Compass." Serena looked at it for a long moment. How do you know that word? Eli shrugged with the enormous dignity of 6-year-olds who know things they're not supposed to. Grandma's Facebook friends told her. Dante walked past with a supply cart, looked at the drawing, then at Serena. We're putting that up. You are not. Already decided. The drawing went up beside the 4 rules above the charge desk. Serena objected. Nobody listened. And on the first Tuesday of every month, when the new residents rotated through their emergency medicine orientation, Serena Wolfe stood at the front of the room for exactly 1 hour and taught them the thing that no textbook had a chapter for. The difference between authority that is given and authority that is earned. The difference between managing a crisis and being present inside one. The difference between a system that protects itself and a system that protects the people who need it. She always started with the same line. In this room, the patient in front of you is the only protocol that cannot be revised. Nobody forgot it. Nobody was supposed to. That was the story of one night, one storm, and one nurse who was tired of being quiet for the wrong reasons. Thank you for spending this time with me at Quiet Badge's Stories. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you know someone working nights in a place like this, tell them they're seen. Drop a comment below letting me know where you're listening from. I read everyone. Stay quiet when quiet is right. Speak up when it matters. I'll see you next time.